So sorry. Thank you for that reminder. So we come to research problem, what a research problem is. So we have already had quite a bit of extensive discussion referring to a research problem. So we have already have a pretty good idea what a research problem should be. Yeah. So it should be a difficulty which a researcher experiences, a researcher, not an organization. It could be in a context of a theory or a practical situation, and you need to obtain a solution. So in the research process, the research problem is the starting point. Until we have actually found our research problem, the research has not begun. And this one is a really, really key point. It's really a key point. I remember when I was doing my research, when I would talk to people, say, oh, I'm doing this, and then someone asked me, so what is the research problem? And the more they asked me that question, the more I realized I actually didn't have a research problem. Your research problem should be clear that when you mention it, somebody knows this is a research problem. So it can start from a real life situation which someone observes. For example, when Ruth pointed out the issue of accessibility for rural areas. Now the issue is now to conceptualize it into something that is researchable. Not just a problem that exists. We just want to improve accessibility. No, we want to find a real solution for IS people or an ICT person that they can design something that is accessible. What approach should one use as a designer? What approach should a designer use that can guide them? It isn't just a situation of saying, oh, I'm developing this thing, this is going to be revolutionary, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. It's revolutionary today, tomorrow it isn't. But what approach can a designer use that brings about accessibility? What framework, what is it that can, and that's what you propose to the research world. Sorry, give me a minute. It seems to have stalled. Okay. So we have different types of research problems. Sorry, this seems to have continued on, but we have different types of research problems. There are those which relate to the state of nature. So here an example is the state of ICT governance processes in institutions of higher learning. Then there are those which relate to relationships between variables. For example, if a chemical fertilizer is the main cause of low production in grain. Sorry, give me a minute. Sorry, give me a minute here. And to see how I can remove some of these things, but anyway. The Zoom also seems to be acting up. See, it's just popping up different images, but sorry about that. Okay. It's okay. Okay, so let's get back to this. So we have different types of research problems. So the research problem guides your research on whether your research is going to be qualitative or quantitative in nature. So that is a key point to note. Let me first just put this in. So it guides your research. Now, when you look at this question, this research problem, which is looking at the state of governance. This points to a more of leaning towards qualitative research. If something is referring to the state or the nature of something, it's leaning towards qualitative research. We looked at the example that Ruth gave us. It's not necessarily leading to a state. It's not referring to the nature of something, or rather it is, because it's trying to determine the applicability of this framework for designing accessible applications. We're trying to answer the question of its applicability, or it's in its nature, but its applicability. So we're trying to determine if there is that possibility. It doesn't lean more towards qualitative, but it begs a question. It has a question that needs to be answered. It's not referring to variables per se, but it's more looking to the nature of something, its applicability, or its is this applicable to our rural context? Can it help a designer develop something for a rural context? So it moves towards that. Then once you see something referring to relationships between variables, this one is leaning towards the quantitative kinds of research. So variables beg a hypothesis. Variables are basically asking you to state a hypothesis which can be either approved or disproved. Sorry, let me just clear this.
Doctor, sorry to take you back a bit. There was a question that was raised before you dropped off, that what is considered an outdated source? Is it 5 years back, 10 years, 15 years?
Look, between the framework of 4 to 5 years, that would be at least not so bad. If all your literature can fall between 4 to 5 years, at least if you show what research has been done within the last 5 years, within the next 4 years, and so on and so forth, that should be relatively okay. Something 10 years back, that is too much. That is a bit too much. Research you're doing now, if you're quoting 2012, that's a bit too far. 2012, 2013, that is a bit too far. Now, for the example of Ruth, what I gave of a framework, you can find out what applications have been developed using that framework. Has there been anything developed for a rural learner? And then follow from that, and you say, okay, I want to do this, and then test it and see. Use this approach and see. Have I answered your question?
Doctor?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
On that very point, what publication is old, what citation is old? I'm envisioning a situation where a particular fact that I want to use is quite outdated, like 2012, but no one has researched on that topic again. But I want to pick a fact out of that research, and it looks like I can't find anything recent.
Okay. Remember, Tom, what I said. If it's your specific research topic, okay, let's use Ruth's example. There's a framework that has been developed, and she wants to find out if there's been any research, any application developed for rural. That is a good point. She can point out, okay, what research has been developed using that framework? What applications have been developed using that framework? And then she points out that applications have been developed for urban dwellers, for primary learners, for secondary learners, for university learners, but nothing has been developed for a developing rural context. So I want to do this. Tom, I don't know if I answer your question. You can't simply say, oh, nothing has been done at all. That cannot be possible. Something must have been done. So you can't say that maybe this has been done related to this, but not in relation to my specific research topic. And this is why I want to do it. Tom, I don't know if I answer your question.
It will get clear with time.
Yeah. Everything depends. Well, everything depends on what it is you're doing. So some of these problems, we solve them as we go along. So how would what would be found in a research problem? So there must be a group, or there must be a particular section of a population that experience this problem. So for example, for Ruth's case, it is rural learners. We're looking at rural learners, or we have specific organizations that experience it. Now, again, even if we say an organization, we don't want to make a problem, let's say, an organizational problem. We don't want it to be an organizational problem. This could be a problem that is experienced elsewhere, but for a specific, the case study that which would be, or your case study area would experience it, but it's experienced elsewhere. This is a key point that you must note as you're writing your research. It should not be related to an organization only. It should first come out of the organization, frame it within an organization, or sort of frame it within a research area, then bring it down to an organization. At no point should, now, for example, if we're looking at the problem, or the Ruth's research problem, in nowhere in our chapter structure did we talk about a specific, maybe, group of rural learners that are experiencing it, maybe in a specific school or a specific university. We're not talking about that. We simply talk about rural schools. Now, when it comes to application itself, or in your research method chapter, Ruth can say she's going to design this for a specific group of rural learners, maybe learners who are in, let us say, Kalangala, or you find these learners in a rural area in Gulu, in the Gulu district, or rural learners in a specific area. But you'd see this in chapter 3 when she's talking about her case study area, but not in your chapter 1 or chapter 2. No. At that point, you don't talk about it. You're talking about it generically. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. Hello? Are we tired?
We are not.
We are still having some energy.
Okay. I wasn't getting a response, but yeah, the key point is somebody is experiencing it, because we want to apply something somewhere and solve it. So in your chapter 1, you'd be talking about this research problem generically, that it's experienced for rural learners. But we haven't talked about, Ruth would not have talked about maybe a specific set of learners, maybe saying, oh, there are certain people in rural Gulu or somewhere or in Kalangala who are experiencing this thing, and so on and so forth. No, by that point, she's not talking about, she's simply talking about rural learners and the challenge of accessibility, the challenge of the rural context in terms of accessibility, which could be financial, it could be backbone network, it could be literacy levels, ICT literacy level, whatever it is. Now, those generic problems experienced by rural learners in a developing context, there's now a proposal to use this framework which proposes that you can design applications that are accessible to all. So because of what it is proposing, you then say, I want to use this to develop an application which I will then implement in a rural context. Now, it will be in your chapter 3 where you begin to talk about maybe that group of learners in Kalangala. They could be at higher institutional level. They could be secondary school, whichever type of learners you've decided to pick on to study using e-learning. And then from there, evaluate its accessibility in terms of finance, in terms of backbone network, in terms of literacy levels, and so on and so forth. I hope you get my point up to there. 2.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. The next thing is there's an objective to be attained. Now, in Ruth's case, what is the objective to be attained? What would be the main objective to be attained? The objective is to design this artifact with the intention to evaluate accessibility. Not so?
Yes, doctor, it is.
It is, doctor. Design this artifact with the intention of evaluating accessibility. It's not designing as in its end point. That's where it ends. No. So it is to design and then evaluate accessibility. That would be the overall objective. After that overall objective, then Ruth has to come up with specific objectives. Which specific objectives must all lead to that overall objective? We shall talk about that later when we come to research questions. We shall come to Ruth's example. There should be alternative objectives, but for you, this is your objective. Maybe someone else would say, but can't Ruth, maybe there's an application which has been designed. There are many other applications. Why doesn't she just apply those? But her objective is to validate this framework. She's coming from this framework which proposes that it can. So now we want to validate it. We want to design something and then say, does this thing actually guide you? I have used it. Now I've designed something. Does it bring about accessibility? Then Ruth will then she can even begin evaluating as she's designing. But this framework talks about, in its domain, talks about this, and this. But I found already that in the rural context, there is this, which this framework doesn't talk about. She's already, as she's designing, she's already evaluating. Actually, Ruth's example is a very good one when we come to research methods. There's a research method that if you're designing an artifact, you must use. There's a research method you must use, and it should appear. And I'll show you how even she can carry out evaluation as she's designing. I'm using this framework. It proposes domain ABCD. It proposes variable ABCD. But as she's designing, she finds that in the rural context, for these rural users, there is this, which has not been considered in this framework. That's already a finding. She goes on ahead. She comes up with the system requirements, blah, blah, blah. She finds there is this. It proposes this, but it was ignored for rural context. This has been neglected. She points it out. She moves on, and these are the reports that she gives out at the end. It's not the application. This is not what she reports back on, but it is these findings that she has found for the rural context, which may have been thought of or may not have been thought of. we shall discuss this further. These are some of the guidelines that you should really focus on when you're doing your research. An area that has been overdone, avoid that. Something that has been over-researched. For example, if someone says, I want to get the challenges to e-learning, that one must have been already done and really doesn't make any point in you trying to do it. Try to pick an area that has not been overdone. Controversial subjects, yeah. Especially where you know you may not get any kind of data. So for ICT, we don't normally have these areas. These areas are not common, but you may find some areas that may be problematic for you. So take an example, if you are looking at cybersecurity strategies, maybe designing cybersecurity strategies for banks, and this may be an area a bank may not open up for you. If it may be a bit of confidential area, and you may find that you have difficulty in getting data, so you would most likely avoid those kinds of areas. Something being too vague or too narrow. Too vague or too narrow. Too narrow, let's example for the case of Ruth. If Ruth decided she said, I'm going to design an application, a mobile application for rural learners, and stops there. At master's level, that's too narrow. So then what? After you design it, then what? Too vague. If Ruth decided to say, my research is going to be on challenges of accessibility, that's too vague. And then after that, then what? So you've pointed them out. Then what? What do we do about it? Again, look at our field. Our field is solution-based. Look for areas that are familiar to you and they are feasible. Familiar to you and feasible, that you can easily gain access to your participants. You can easily gain access to data. This is a key point. This saves a lot of time for a researcher, really saves a lot of time. So focus on that. Consider the importance of the subject. So again, literature review gives you the substance, the substance of something. I remember one time someone said it seems far-fetched, but it gives a good example. Someone was telling me that someone may decide to say, I want to find out the distance between the Earth and the Moon. Now, that may be something you don't know, but others already know. Okay, if we don't know that distance and we find it out, and then after we find it out, then so what? Well, is there going to be a miscarriage of justice just because we know or we don't know the distance between the moon? So what is the significance of your research? What is the importance of finding out this particular research? Now, for instance, if Ruth found out that this framework is actually helpful, she then proposes to the IS world that, you know what, we can use this framework. It can produce for us applications that are applicable, that are, what's that word we use? I don't know that word we use. That are right for our context. This framework can be then proposed to the IS field that it is of value to us. Or if she finds out that there are some components missing, she then proposes for to make the framework more mature. It makes it mature. Now, for example, we have frameworks like the term framework or the term theory, which have become mature because they have been used extensively and been validated. So you add a new component that previously the framework did not have. So that becomes of significance. That's where Ruth's work, research becomes significant. The importance of preliminary studies is also key. The preliminary studies. Remember what Tom was saying, that what if he finds there was a risk, something which was proposed in 2012 but has been no research done before. The key point is there was other research done. You point out what has other research been focusing on, but as of 2012, this proposal was done in 2012, but nothing has been done. So my research wants to do this. All other research has been focusing on this area. Tom, the key point is to find out what has all the other research been focusing on. Let me give an example. Maybe Ruth's all other research has been focusing on designing e-learning applications, open source learning applications, but no one has been focusing on accessibility for rural users. Maybe everyone has been focusing on accessibility for urban learners, but not focusing on accessibility for rural users. So her research area is rural users because all other research has been urban learners. And she points out that all this other research has been urban learners, but we now want to focus on rural users. The point is, Tom, maybe in 2012, they pointed out rural users, but all subsequent research has been focusing on urban learners. So, Tom, your up-to-date research would be pointing out that all the current research, 2021, 2022, it has all been focusing on on urban learners, but not on rural users. If there has been any research on rural users, it has been pointing out challenges, but not solutions. Tom, I don't know if I'm trying to make this as clear as possible, your question, because it's really significant.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah. His question is very, very significant, and it's good that we have a clear guidance on what we can do. So how then would we frame our research problem? And it's good we had a sample where we had the case of Ruth that she gave us, and we did the chapter structure. So we saw how we built our research problem coming to the statement of the problem. So the statement of the problem would be done in a general way, and this should be a paragraph or two. It really shouldn't be big. A paragraph or two for your research problem. It should be stated in a general way. So we shouldn't be seeing in Ruth's statement of the problem, talking about, for instance, a particular set of rural learners in Kalangala. Yeah, we shouldn't be seeing that. It should be stated in a general way about the need to design these applications for rural learners who experience unique problems, unique challenges because of their context. That should be generic. She shouldn't be talking about what specific challenges learners have in Kalangala. No, it should be done in a generic way. We should have an understanding of the nature of the problem. So remember what I took you through the chapter structure. That is a good example of understanding the nature of the problem. surveying the available literature. Again, that chapter structure example gives you on how to survey the available literature. One of the things you can use is to discuss your idea. Start with your supervisor. That's one. Two, you can discuss with your colleagues. If you have experts around you, people who are well-versed with that area, please go ahead and have a discussion on that with them. So let me give you an example. I am a little bit, not too much, a little bit of an expert in ICT for D research and specifically mHealth. So if someone is discussing, wanted to research in that area, they probably would say, oh, let me talk to Sheba because she has done research in that area. Because I've also done a little bit of research with Palliative Care Association. I've also done some research with them and also done some evaluation of an mHealth application. So I've done a little bit of research. So I have an area, there are areas where I may be an expert. So you may want to discuss with somebody who is an expert in a certain area, and they may give you more insight on areas on areas that are fresh and need to be looked at, and they may help you narrow down your research problem a little bit easier. Then placing your research problem into a working proposition. You realize that we phrased Ruth's research problem into something workable, into designing an application based on a framework and then evaluating it later for accessibility. Already we can see what we're going to do with Ruth's research problem. So these are just some of the techniques. We've actually been doing them on the practical side, but this slide just gives you further guidance on that. So these are just some of the steps you can use to identify. You start with a broad study area. So someone may look at ICT governance, someone may look at cybersecurity, interoperability. By the interoperability is also another governance area that one can look at. ICT and human-computer interaction. We already saw for Ruth's, it was about rural learners and the issue of accessibility, and then we found a framework. So we already see these are the broad areas. Then you dissect it into areas that are workable. So we started with e-learning and accessibility for Ruth. Then we went to specifically to rural learners. Then we found that there's a framework that proposes designing, and we looked at the design element. Then we found that there was a framework. So you see, all of these steps we went through help you narrow down your research topic. Those steps we went through, those basic steps we went through for the case of Ruth, helped us to narrow down our research. An important thing is pick something that is of interest to you. Yeah, pick something that is of interest to you. So most of the time you find people will pick something that is at work. That's an area of interest. So start with something that is of interest to you. Study your research questions. Can they help us answer your research problem? Set objectives. Now, the objectives we normally say must be smart. Yeah, they must be smart. This should be clearly stated. When we look at research questions, we shall look at this step in detail. Now, at this point, it's 11. I'm imagining some of you might be tired. We've had quite a bit of breaks here and there. I would suggest we stop here and we look at research questions and objectives next. What I will do is have a pre-recorded lecture on that, on specifically research questions, then research objectives and how to come up with smart research objectives. Then we shall have a forum discussion, which will then be supported by a class, a discussion in class. Is that okay?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay. So I suggest we stop here, and I upload this, I send this to ICT immediately, these recordings that we've had for yesterday and today. And then then I will pass this, I'll give you the lecture slides as well.
Okay.
You've already had your first assignment. I've already given that one to you, so that one is fine. So before, I believe by Monday, I should have posted all of these.
Okay, Doctor.
Okay, do we have any questions so far? We've had discussed quite a bit. Do we have any questions so far? Okay. Okay, then I assume then all is fine.